everyone. We're glad that you could join us today. We're very excited to have these remarkable panelists to talk about the centennial of the 19th Amendment. Before we begin the panel, I'd like to introduce ADL Michigan's Regional Director, Carolyn Normandin.
Thank you, Kristen. Hello, everyone. We've come here today to celebrate the centennial of the women's right to vote. We've planned this for a while, and even as the COVID-19 pandemic made us rethink our plans a little bit and create a virtual celebration, on May 25th, another event, the killing of George Floyd, gave us pause, not only as a Michigan ADL staff, but as part of a national movement to say enough is enough. And today, with memorials and protests going on all over the country, we remind ourselves we must not be bystanders. We must be upstanders, allies. We've joined with the voices of so many others to condemn the continued injustices we know are happening in communities all over our country. And we pledge to continue the work. We will continue to speak out because it's rooted in our mission to fight for justice and secure fair treatment to all. So before we go any further, I'd like to remember George Floyd and the countless numbers of others who have suffered racist brutality and violence with a moment of silence. Thank you. Now, you may be wondering why the Anti-Defamation League cares so much about the 19th Amendment. It's simple, really. ADL is a civil rights organization, and we've been speaking out for equal rights for more than a century. Our areas of focus include safeguarding religious freedom and the separation of church and state, combating hate crimes, advocating for immigration reform and refugee rights, advancing LGBTQ rights, closing the educational gap, reforming the criminal justice system, and yes, securing the right to vote and promoting women's rights. We do this work because we know no one in this country is safe until we are all safe. We continue our proactive work all the time, which is why we gather today to honor the passage of the 19th Amendment, knowing that even the right to vote for women came unevenly. The 19th Amendment did not extend initially to women of African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, and Native American heritage because of widespread and enduring inequality and racism, which came even from within the ranks of the women's suffrage movement. And in much of the country, hurdles like poll taxes and literacy tests kept Black and brown voters disenfranchised. It wasn't until the 1965 Voting Rights Act was passed that women of color were officially allowed to fully exercise their right to vote. We also must acknowledge that the work remains unfinished. Safeguarding voting rights for all is crucial as we move forward as a nation because we must continue to ensure that all voices are heard. Recognizing that women's rights are civil rights and civil rights are women's rights, ADL continues to advocate for equity. And there's a lot to discuss today, so let's get to it. I'd like to turn the program back to Kristen Jagger, ADL's Director of Education.
Hi again. Carolyn mentioned my name is Kristen Jagger. My pronouns, for those of you who are wondering, are she, her, and hers. I'm happy to be with you today. I'm so excited to lead this panel of women leaders in the field of education, advocacy, law, and education. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists for today. Our first panelist is Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. She took office in January of 2019. But before taking office, AG Nessel honed her skills as a Wayne County prosecutor. Before starting her practice as a defender of constitutional rights and the rights of indigent defendants, and she then became a premier litigator of the LGBTQ issues. She challenged Michigan's bans on adoption and marriage for same-sex couples with DeBoer v. Snyder, the landmark US Supreme Court case which legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. She has also founded the Fair Michigan Foundation, and with the Wayne County prosecutor, created the Fair Michigan Justice Project to prosecute hate crimes. She is a University of Michigan and Wayne State University Law School graduate. Thank you for joining us, AG Nessel.
Thanks for having me.
Our second panelist is Lacy Dawson. Lacy is the Senior Voting Rights Program Manager at the ACLU of Michigan. Her community organizing career began in 2008 during the election of President Barack Obama. The experience of being a part of a major movement and a moment in history took her on a journey which changed the very fiber of her being. She is a proud native Detroiter who finds endless inspiration in community and grassroots organizing. Her major organizing career roles include super volunteer, field organizer, field director, regional field director, and state director. She believes that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And she lives for the day when racism and hate no longer exist. And so do we. We're glad you could join us, Lacy. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. Thank you.
Our third panelist is Karen Twomey. Karen holds a master's in educational leadership from MSU and brings deep perspective on public education. As a parent of 3 students in Ferndale Public Schools, she's served on the Ferndale Board of Education. She's partnered with PTA, MASB, and SBA to advocate at the state and national level for equity in education. Her activism as a president of the Michigan Network for Equity in Education worked to connect districts predominantly of color in fighting for fair funding and local control. Last year, Karen served on the State Social Studies Bias Review Committee. In the Bloomfield Hills School District, she is a social studies teacher dedicated to presenting equitable narratives and helps in partnership with ADL to lead the Global Leaders Program with a mission to empower students in cultivating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive school and district environment. She is also one of our No Place for Hate coordinators at Bloomfield Hills High School, which was just recently designated as a No Place for Hate campus for the 2019 and 2020 school year. Thank you for joining us, Karen.
Thanks for including me.
Of course. And our fourth panelist is Amy Good. Amy holds a master's of social work and a bachelor's of psychology from the University of Michigan. She has served as Alternative for Girls CEO since 1988. She has over 38 years of experience managing and directing human services programs serving Detroit children and families. Under her leadership, Alternatives for Girls has grown from a volunteer-led project to a full-service agency serving homeless and high-risk girls and young women, along with their families through street outreach, emergency shelter, transition to independent living, and prevention services. She served as a gubernatorial appointee of the Michigan Committee on Juvenile Justice, and serves as the Goodwill Industries Greater Detroit Board. She is a member of the Michigan chapter of International Women's Forum. Her awards include Oprah Winfrey's Use of Life, the United Way Community Service Executive Director of the Year, a Leadership Detroit's Leadership Challenge Award, and the National Council of Jewish Women Joseph S. Wiener Award for Community Service. We're so glad we could have you here too, Amy. Thank you.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
So we have a panel discussion that we're going to start, and then we're going to follow up with question and answer. As my colleague Emily Snyder mentioned, if you have any questions during the middle of discussion, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and we'll get to that after our discussion. So we're going to kick it off with a question for Attorney General Nessel. Attorney General Nessel, in your opinion, has the field of law been impacted by the 19th Amendment, and has that impacted gender equity in workspaces?
Well, I mean, I think everything starts with having the right to vote. I mean, without the right to vote, really, you can't get to anything else that is impactful or important in terms of gender equity, no matter what you're talking about. And that's why I think that it's been such a shock to the system for those of us who are used to, or more used to, I will say, a more gender inclusive environment. For me, one of the big inspirations for me running for office was all the videos that came out after Donald Trump was elected to the presidency, where you see a room full of older white men, and that's it. Just very, very, I mean, very few people of color, and usually no women, or maybe just Betsy DeVos, but that was it. You know, I mean, you would see so few women represented. And I just think for me, I really felt as though it was important, no matter what topic of discussion, some that were specific to gender equity, but then many other, you know, such as, you know, whether it had to do with reproductive rights or pay equity or sexual harassment or assault issues that seemingly are very focused on on women and women's rights, but then all kinds of other issues as well, and whether that had to do with education, whether it had to do with paid sick leave. I mean, you could just go on and on and on, and it seemed as though missing the female perspective was just so critical and so important, and then we had to have more female voices in the room. And I remember for our state legislature, in our state senate, we had more men who were named Mike than women in our state, senate. I mean, so that was, that was the reality. And I will say this for myself, that I was startled at the pushback at the notion of having too many women running for office in 2018 when I decided to run. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, I couldn't believe that it was 2018 and we were still facing the same kinds of issues that, had been around for decades and decades, some would argue centuries. And I remember very vividly trying to convince people that I would be a good nominee for the Democratic Party for AG, and having so many people say to me, well, there's this consideration for this lady named Gretchen Whitmer to be our governor, and Jocelyn Benson is the only one who's running for Secretary of State in the Democratic Party, and we cannot have 3 women be our candidates for our top 3 executive offices. And I was so stunned because in 2014 we had 3 guys that were our nominees, and I didn't hear anybody complaining about that. And I just thought, I can't believe it's 2018 and we still are arguing about this. And I kept saying over and over again to anybody who would hear me, I think that actually we'll do better with 3 women candidates, because women voters who were voting in rates that were outpacing men were so interested in having more visibility and better representation in state government. And it really played in completely with the Me Too movement, which was happening at the exact same time, really started in the fall of 2017. And you would hear over and over again these stories of, and I'm sorry, but, exclusively men that seem to be abusing, their authority and using their authority to sexually harass and sometimes sexually assault women. Mm-hmm. And I kept saying, well, the best way to ensure that that doesn't continue is to have more women in positions of authority, no matter where that is, in elected government, in the boardrooms, in journalism, no matter where it is. But I had to fight really hard. And even in the Democratic Party, which I think is seen as being a little more progressive on women's issues, unfortunately, I would go into rooms full of these decision makers, whether they be law enforcement or whether they be unions, and I was often the only woman in the room. Mm-hmm. I sort of couldn't believe, like, even in the Democratic Party, I was so often, when I was surrounded by these higher ups in the party, I would only be surrounded by men. So it was a struggle. It was a struggle to convince people that 3 women could lead this state. But fortunately, women turned out in droves and voted. And so here I am, and now we have a female governor and a female secretary of state and multiple congresswomen. And of course, Debbie Stabenow, a United States Senator, and 3 of our 7 Michigan Supreme Court justices are women, including our Chief Justice, and more women in the state legislature than I think we've ever had before. Certainly, I know that we had higher numbers of women that were elected in 2018 for the legislature than we've ever had before. So I really think it goes to the power of harkening back to the 19th Amendment. Obviously, none of that would be possible if women couldn't vote. And I think that women are going to have the biggest impact on the presidential race this year. And their input is going to be more important now than it's ever been.
I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more. And we're so glad that our state is being led by such talent. So thank you. My next question is for Lacy. Lacy, in your opinion, what are the most critical issues candidates need to address for women voters in the upcoming election?
So we all know that when women lead, things get done. When women lead, magic happens. And this is nothing, we're taking anything away from the role of men in society. We all have some distinct roles. The lines can be blurred, but I am confident, and I know for sure, and I know for certain that when women lead, things happen, good things happen, magic happens. And so, I am proud of Michigan in the fact that we do have women leading at the top. And, just piggybacking off of what the Attorney General said, it is a shame that you walk into a room and you're the only woman in the room. And then it is another shame when you're the only Black woman in the room, if that even exists. We have come to a time in society that everyone must pay attention to the fact that women are the foundation of society. We do good work. So Canada's got to pay attention to a few things at the moment where we're going through this pandemic. If you were to look at who's on the front line of this pandemic, who are the frontline workers? I myself refused to go out of the house for a couple of weeks, and I decided, okay, you got to go to the grocery store now. It's enough of eating pickles and making up these dishes, right? And I went to several stores, and at every store I saw a young, probably single mother who was risking her life to go to work to make less than what she would need to actually survive. In 2020, frontline worker, when I look on television and I see the nurses who are crying their eyes out because they've seen and experienced so much trauma in these emergency rooms, usually a woman. Not saying that men are empathetic, because we do definitely have that, but we have to pay attention that we have to support the folks that are doing the work in this society to keep everything together. When things go chaotic, we have the energy and the spirit, the know-how, the intellect to right the ship. We have the vocalization to say this isn't fair when we don't live in fear. So I think that, our politicians and those who are running to be elected need to pay attention to the fact that they have to give special attention to women's issues, special attention to the fact that we need to be able to relegate our own bodies, special attention to moms that are at home now trying to juggle between homeschooling their children and trying to work, special attention to the water crisis where most of the homes that have water shut off, there's a mom there that's trying to figure out what to do for her children. Special attention to those who keep this country going and who will step into the room and make a demand that, hey, you don't see me now, but you will see me soon. And we're coming in droves, because when women lead, magic happens. It's just as simple as that. So I would say to any politician running now, we're going to take it over. It's just a matter of time. It's our turn. It's our time. You've had it long enough. And just scoot over or leave the room if you're not pleased with what's coming your way. But women, I believe that we are just blessed to be the magic that is needed to happen in this space, for sure.
I hope that those issues inspire more women to the polls this upcoming election. We need to hear more voices. My next question is for Amy. Amy, what do you think the girls and young women who participate in your program and Alternatives for Girls would say is the most important issue we need to advocate for in achieving gender equity?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for giving me the chance to share what they had to say when I asked them. This in itself raises their voices. We asked the girls and young women in our shelter, our peer educators, our peer leaders, and others in our street program, others, this question, and it triggered a watershed. The top issues they identified included equal pay for equal work. That was by far the top. They gave many examples of their experiences and observations, ranging from professional sports to access to managerial roles in restaurants. Equal access to opportunities such as employment, especially in jobs that have historically been male-dominated. They particularly noted the roles of elected officials and other decision and policymakers. Another issue was equal voice in family matters. Another was access to health care. They know that lack of access to health care puts an undue burden on women, especially mothers. access to protection from sexual harassment and sexual assault in all roles, including low-paid jobs and vulnerable roles, even outside of employment, such as tenants in low-income housing. Recognition for leadership roles and skills, especially informal ones. Acceptance of the full range of gender identities. They also noted that we need greater acceptance of the value of expressing feelings, such that men and women are both allowed to do so and are respected for doing so. I thought that was an interesting one. I can't put it better than two of our peer educators, so I'll share their words. One said, "The whole issue is that there's no such thing as something having to be for men or for women. It's hard to get people to understand that we should be equal. I know consistency is the key, and if we persevere, we can make it happen." She was 16. And another from a 17-year-old who was just elected to Alternatives for Girls, our board of directors. There are more female faces on large platforms all over the world today who are trying to set examples. They are setting the foundation for all of us to have better opportunities, which is why I believe we need more people, more women doing this. We, young women, should be the ones who start it and make sure we open doors in the future so not one young girl should fear for lack of opportunities.
Thanks, Amy. Those are powerful words coming from young people. I would agree. I think this is a great time to talk to Karen. Karen, how do you think our current education system addresses issues of gender equity and equality, and what still needs to be done?
Well, first I have to say, listening to Amy talking about her young people and me thinking about some of the students I've just been talking to, I almost wondered if maybe one of them should be here instead, because it's always best to get things from the horse's mouth, as we say, right? So when it comes to education, I have to say women, we're doing awesome at academics. We outperform men in almost every metric there is. So what we should really be talking about is more of what Attorney General Nessel was bringing up, which is this gap in elite representation, or that sort of prestige gap. Because even though women are getting more college degrees than men, we're 60% of the bachelor's degrees, we've even made it up to 45% of the PhDs. I think we're going to surpass that too soon. And yet only 7% of the CEOs, about a quarter of the elected officials. So what's happening there? Even in education, where women make up 77% of all teachers, we're only 13% of the superintendents. So as an educator, it makes me think more about what are we doing that is socializing people into this culture of prestige segregation, and how do we dismantle it? So that's where I think we start our work. I also like to think, Amy, you were talking a little bit about how we have to look beyond heteronormative and recognize the expansive genders there are. So it's definitely true that in 1972, when Title IX was passed, we were really looking at closing gaps between boys and girls. And now I think we just have to look at how do we close gaps of experience and opportunity between all non-male students and our male students. So here's just some of my humble beginning thoughts. I think that whenever you're taking on issues of equity, you always start with a process of listening, learning, and supporting. So by that I mean making sure that we start our process by listening to those of the identity who are most impacted, taking time to build our own awareness, and then making sure that the solutions that we proceed with are the solutions that they have requested, that we're really listening to them and they're coming from within the population. So something I know we've started in our own school, and partially in cooperation with Kristen, so thank you for your support from ADL,
Absolutely.
is we've been starting to do listening sessions, and that actually comes out of a deep tradition in the African American community. It's so powerful to make sure that you are first hearing from the experience of those impacted, so that you really know where your actions need to begin. Once you do that, you start to develop some trust, and using that trust, you can build a team. And it's so important that as you develop that team, you are modeling for the students protocols that are truly empowering, those who own the identity. We don't want to be making decisions for, we want to be making decisions with, supporting, providing the resources, the knowledge they need, maybe providing some opportunities of ideas, but the choices have to ultimately be from them. The power has to come from them. I think it's also really important that we verbalize what our values are. I feel really lucky that in the state of Michigan, we're one of only 15 states where our Board of Education passed guidelines providing safe and supportive schools for LGBTQ students. So that's really fantastic. That doesn't actually have a lot of legal teeth. So that's why it's really important if you're listening, you know, here's the teacher in me, get out your pen. I've got some ideas to write down for you to make sure your schools are doing. Challenge your schools and ask them, have you adopted similar guidelines to support these in our own district and school buildings? And you can look those up really easily. I think that another great toolkit that's out there, again, always going to the community so that they can speak for themselves. GLSEN, for those of you who aren't familiar, GLSEN, they have an amazing toolkit that can help you also provide a really supportive environment for our students in the LGBT community. Another thing that we think about in schools is look at some of those policies, things like dress codes. We notice that they always seem to be very female focused. So I know when I was on the Board of Education in Ferndale, we adopted a new dress code. A great model dress code to look at is the Portland dress code that really gets away from that female focused dress code. I also want to highlight all of our graduates. 2020 has been definitely a unique year, and we still see our people out there putting on their gowns. So it's a good time to reflect, are these gowns binary in nature? Are students having to choose whether they wear the female or the male? Is that really an inclusive choice? So that's another thing to think about. Then we get into the next and deeper layer where we talk about curriculum. It's really important that our curriculum isn't perpetuating this gap in elite representation. So we need to make sure that the curriculum that we are presenting to our students shows women in power, shows the diversity of genders and orientations. And if you're looking for a tool for that, I know that Great Lakes Equity Center has some tools up there based on Sadker's 7 forms of bias. They're wonderful. Go ahead, encourage your school to use those when reviewing their curriculum. Another area of curriculum that I really like to put focus on is thinking about things like our sexual education courses. I know in Dexter, they just adopted the 3 R's curriculum, which again recognizes the diversity of genders and orientations. So that's really great. And do make sure that your school has things like a GSA. It's so important that people have a place that they can have that affinity grouping and feel comfortable. So those are just some of my initial thoughts, and I'm sorry if I talked too long.
No, that's okay. I really appreciate, I mean, ADL is really big on like examining your policies and examining your curriculum to make sure that it is addressing the needs of your students. And I think that you hit the nail on the head, and that's something that ADL certainly stands behind. I want to ask another question of Lacy, and this is kind of going to be switching gears into more like voter rights conversation. So Lacy, this one, I'm wondering, what is ACLU Michigan currently working on as far as securing voter rights and access?
So the biggest projects, or one of the biggest projects, is really making certain that Prop 3, which was passed in 2018, is implemented properly, that the clerks across the state have the support that they need in order to implement, and also that community is educated to understand the new laws that are in place. So it's a big assignment. It is a really, really big assignment, but it is something that I know that will be successful and that we can do. You top that with the pandemic, and you know, people get really concerned that democracy is going to go down the drain. We are happy to say that we do have a Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, who has made some really, really, really key decisions to secure people's mindsets around protecting our right to vote in August and November. So what the ACLU has decided to do is to make sure that we're working together and to piggyback to ensure that constituents across the state specifically some that are in marginalized communities who have had their right to vote attacked by the emergency manager law, that they are inspired, encouraged, and understand the upcoming election and the fact that they have the right to vote. Is so much that is going to go into this, right? We want to make certain that people understand that they will all be getting mailed a ballot. When you get the envelope, a ballot application, when you get the envelope, and I got mine yesterday, when you get this envelope, folks need to know, don't just let it sit on the table. Open it up, look through it. If you have questions, contact someone. Look at the michiganvoting.org website. Contact the NAACP. Contact the League of Women Voters if you have questions. Look at the Secretary of State's website so that you understand that this envelope here is probably one of the most important pieces of check, other than your $1 million check from Publishers Clearinghouse that I didn't get the other day, that this piece of mail is crucial and that we need to definitely dive into it. Once everyone fills out that application, they're going to receive a ballot in the mail, and ballots can be spoiled. So we do have processes that will be in place to actually do absentee ballot chases to make sure that people understand how they are to fill that ballot out. And I'm just happy to say that this is not work that the ACLU is doing ourselves. We have partners across the state who are coming together to say that they work with specific constituents. They work with individuals in the LGBTQ community. They work with constituents in the homeless community. They work with young residents. They work with college students. So they're coming together saying, hey, I can take a piece of this pie, and I'm gonna make sure that we educate every last constituent that we work with and beyond. So it's an exciting, exciting, exciting program. It is so needed. You know, the NAACP has a mantra, take your souls to the polls. Luckily, our Secretary of State has guaranteed us, and our governor has guaranteed us, that they will have polling locations open, maybe not as many, but people who need to vote in person will have access to that. But for those of us who choose to vote absentee, we need to change the mantra to, let's take our families to the table. Let's have a date night with our ballots. Let's have a challenge with our ballots. Let's make sure we fill out the entire thing and sign the envelope so that we don't make a mistake and not have our vote counted specifically because of one error. So we're not telling people that our elections are not safe. Our elections will be safe because when women lead, we think about the whole gamut of things that could potentially happen, and we respect everyone's rights to make a decision on what's going to be best for their lives. So the ACLU is committed. I mean, the team is really working hard. The team is really thinking creatively, and our partners are just ready to roll. So when you get the calls to volunteer, come aboard. When you get the calls to help educate, come on down, because it is really, really, really needed. So go ACLU, go Team Michigan. Just really excited to make sure our election is very successful.
We agree. And, you know, Lacy, I don't want to ignore all of those wonderful partners and information you just shared. So please make sure you share with me those links so that I can share that in a follow-up email for anybody who's participating today. So I'll touch base with you offline about that.
No problem.
Great, thank you. AG Nessel, we know with the passage of the amendment in 1920 that it gave the right to vote for white women. And it wasn't until 1965 that people of color and Black women had the right to vote. So we know that there's still work to be done. And what do you think needs to be improved for women with overlapping marginalized identity in order to be able to have access to voting? Oh, did we lose you?
I'm sorry, but whatever that means. So
Oh, we lost you. I think you may have.
you're saying, but so could you repeat the?
Sure. So we know that there is still work.
Unstable. Sure what that means.
I mean, we live in a Zoom life, right? So nothing ever works the way we want it to. Okay, I will repeat it. I was going to say, in your opinion, what do you think we still need to do to improve voter access for women who have overlapping marginalized identities?
I'm really
No,
sorry.
still
You
missing.
keep cutting out. I apologize. Maybe you should
Everything was going
type
so
harder.
smooth. Okay, I'm going to give you a second. How about I move on? I'll come back to you on the next question.
Right? What do we need to do to improve?
For women who have overlapping marginalized identities.
But I can't hear anything. So, which is, I don't know what to do here.
It's okay. I think we're going to move on to another question and we'll come back to you.
I'm sorry. I can't hear anything.
That's okay.
Why don't you move on to the next page?
That's what we're going to do. Okay.
Come back to me and maybe this will improve, okay? I'm going to go check out my network, all right?
Got it. All right.
Check it out. I'll be back.
Karen, what do you think are the educational messages that we need to be sending to young people to encourage them to take an interest and get involved in the election process?
Well, thanks for asking. So I think this really returns us to that idea of how are we socializing our kids, right? We can either raise them to believe that their voices matter and that their engagement has value, or we can condition them into that hopeless silence. What I have found is that people disengage on both ends of the spectrum. So either when they are completely pleased and have full faith, or when they've absolutely lost faith and trust. And so what I'm thinking of right now is when following Parkland, all of our students took to the streets. I was honored to have 3 students, female, who organized a bus, invited in our neighbors from Pontiac, and we drove to Washington, D.C. I've never seen so many young people stand up for something. And at the end of all of that, nothing happened. So what are we conditioning them to think? I think about the great Elizabeth Stanton, who started this women's movement in many ways there at Seneca Falls, and she opened her speech saying, "We are assembled to protest against a form of government existing without the consent of the governed." And it seems to me, if you look at our streets right now and what's happening with the protest over George Floyd, that is exactly the fight that we are still in, is the fight for the consent of the governed. And so I can only hope that this time our students will be heard. We see so many young people out there, and that we don't continue to train them into that hopelessness. When it comes to our curriculum, I think that it is really important to make sure to continue to talk about the historical barriers that have occurred to voting. And I think we also need them to teach them to think critically about the questions that are actually happening in the ballot box. Because what I ask my students to wonder is this really where the meaningful questions are being asked? Is this true consent of the governed? And so I think that really starts to happen at the local level. That's where people feel most connected. Ms. Dawson, I really hear you when you talk about the idea of emergency management. We are the state that in 2017 had 80% of our African Americans living under emergency management, meaning that they had absolutely lost their right to vote. So you ask, why would people not show up to vote? Why should they show up to vote if the vote has been taken away, if it's only symbolic, where they're most connected? And another thing that I want to talk about is the majority of those emergency managements were put onto school boards, which, by the way, are one of the few places where we do actually see a slightly higher female representation. So while we're only a quarter of elected offices, women make up 40% of our school boards. And those were just thrown out. So what message does that start to send? I think it's something that we really need to think about. And so I encourage my students to think about that. I know in our own classrooms, and think about some of the ways that people do lose faith in that vote. So is the power actually representing them? If they don't feel it is, why would they show up to vote? I think people don't show up to vote if they feel that there are no real choices. And I know that something my students really were observing in our government classroom is that oftentimes the decisions of candidates are already made by the party. Well, what if, as another example, the decisions for your district are being made by some outsourced group of philanthropists or entrepreneurs that are coming in and imposing their decisions upon you. They're not working with you, they're making the decisions for you. So I don't know that people are motivated to come up and vote when the vote is just perfunctory. And then I think another thing that we have to be cautious of is when the votes become diluted. A local community always deserves agency over their own community. And so when that becomes diluted, when we start making votes go statewide for local issues, I think that's something that we have to be really thinking critically of. And so I challenge my students on that, and then to make sure that they always remember one of the big challenges of this consent of the governed and having a democracy is that majority rule always must be kept in check by minority rights. We cannot continue to choose the comfort of the majority over the rights of the minority. It can't happen. And so when I think about our students, I think about how important it is that when we teach about voting, we're also teaching about what are the choices in the ballot box and are they authentic. And I just hope that we can train our students to be true allies that will listen to and stand up for the voices of those impacted.
Yeah, I agree. I hear we might have AG Nessel back.
I think so. As it
Okay.
turns out, you can't have every member of your family live streaming things at the same exact time that you're trying to do one of these. So I had to kick my sons off their devices. I think we're good.
Tell them it's only 15 more minutes, so we'll try. So I know that Emily typed in the question in the chat. I don't know if you happen to see it. Did you want to follow back on that and maybe give us a response?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, so obviously, one of the things that I think I'm most proud of in terms of the women's rights movement is how I think for most women who have historically been involved in such movements, that is not the only thing that's important to them. And we saw spring out of women's rights movements, especially I know those of like say the 1960s and 70s, also LGBTQ rights, also rights for people of color. And, you know, you really can't achieve equity with one without the other. And you have to have true representation, not just in terms of gender, but obviously in terms of every kind of consideration that there is. I'm just gonna talk about sort of my experiences in state government. When I was running for this office, you know, one of the things that I had long seen in cases against the AG's office is that here, this is an agency that is supposed to represent the entire state of Michigan. And yet the diversity that I saw in the office was this, that there were white Christian straight men with long ties, and then white Christian straight men with bow ties. So that was your basic diversity that you had for assistant AGs that worked at the office and the investigators and the support staff. And there were so few women in positions of authority, but there were so few people of color. There were so few, well, I mean, frankly, under the prior administrations, you couldn't be an openly gay person or trans person working in that office. And fun fact, after the recession, I tried to get a job at the AG's office because my practice had sort of fallen apart, as many practices did, you know, legal practices and businesses did, because nobody had any money to hire a lawyer. Right. And I thought I'll go back and work for state government again. And I had, you know, a wealth of experience with 11 years as a assistant prosecutor in Wayne County, and was basically told up front by the Schuette administration that they would never hire somebody like me because I was openly gay. Mm-hmm. And they would only hire, you know, they had some gays working there, but they were in the closet. You can't really talk about it. If you're going to be so open about it, you can't get hired. And I was like, well, then I guess later on I'll come and embarrass you with this big lawsuit and take you to the Supreme Court and beat you. So guess he should have hired me when he had the chance. But what I'm saying is, I looked at this office and I got in there and I decided to have transition meetings prior to taking office on January 1st so I could get to know the staff, because I've never worked in state government before. And, you know, I figured all that people knew of me were those Dangerous Dana ads that you saw. And I wanted people to know more about me than whatever the scary 30-second ad was that they saw run 1,000 times. So I had every single division in to talk to everybody. And it was just like a sea of white people. And mostly many people who had come from small towns around Michigan. And I remember saying, like, is no one from the metropolitan Detroit area? Because that's where a lot of people live in our state. But it struck me as, you know, and I would have my division chief meetings where I'd have, you know, over, you know, some 30 or more people that really ran the office, the day-to-day operations of the office. And, you know, practically no women at all. And like, I think out of like 30 people, one person of color. And I just thought, you know, as has been mentioned before, I mean, like over half the people who graduate from law school are women.
Mhm.
And what, you can only find a small handful of women that are good enough to be in positions of power in the state AG's office.
Mhm.
And so I really pushed back against that, in part because, you know, I came from Wayne County. I was used to working in an office where you had people of every different background there possibly is, every race, every gender, every ethnicity, every sexual orientation, you know, so on and so forth. And I felt like, you know, there are just so many important reasons that you need to be represented by everybody. And it's not just because, I mean, you can't assume that's because somebody is white that they're prejudiced against Black people, or because somebody is straight, they're prejudiced against gay people, or anything like that. But the problem is, when you don't come from that background yourself, it is harder to understand the communities that need to be served. And so, you know, I worked really hard to make sure that we had better representation. Apparently I went a little too far, because I got told early on in my administration that I had so many women in the executive office that it was making the men feel uncomfortable. You know, and I was like, well, welcome to what the rest of us have been dealing with. The rest, you know,
Sit with the uncomfortable. It's good.
But they just weren't used to it. And I just remember, I always like to tell the story of one of our first big meetings with the governor, you know, my executive team and her executive team. And it was the governor and the governor's chief of staff and several other people, some of her legal counsel, and it was myself and my solicitor general and my chief of operations and my chief legal counsel at the time. I mean, and it was all women in this incredibly powerful, you know, room, making some of the biggest decisions that I remember, you know, having to excuse myself and go to the restroom and saying to the governor, I was like, hey, does anybody here have a tampon? And she looked at me and she goes, Madam Attorney General, everyone here has a tampon. So anyway, sorry for adding tampon jokes to this. But my point is that it was just such a novel experience to have, you know, so many women involved in these very higher stages of authority. And I think that, and I don't know if it's a partisan thing or not, but I know that the governor has tried very hard to make sure that there was representation, not just, you know, gender equity, but that there was good representation in regard to all communities in the state. And I've tried to do the same thing. And I really, when you are in a room and you have voices from every single different community represented, I'm telling you, the conversation is so much better. And the solutions that you're able to come up with are so much more effective and impactful. And I know this because I've been in both rooms. I've been in those rooms where there are no people of color. I've been in rooms where I'm the only woman. I've been in rooms where no one's ever met another gay person, you know? And then I've been in rooms that are fully reflective, the whole rainbow spectrum of everybody who's included. And I'm telling you, those are the solutions and those are the policies that always seem to impact most people in the best ways. And I truly subscribe to that. I think it's incredibly important. And I think the world that we're seeing right now, when we turn on the TV every single night, the polarization of our society, it emanates from having leadership that doesn't subscribe to that and who doesn't see everybody as equal. And when we do treat everybody equally and we bring everybody to the table, we're not going to have the kind of society that we have right now, where there's so much anger and there's so much polarization, and we can't sit down together even and format basic policy. And I truly believe that that is so much of the solution to many of the hardships that we face in our country right now. And maybe we wouldn't have people rioting in the streets if we had better representation at the highest levels of federal government.
Hear, 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 hear. Thank you for that. We are running so much out of time, but I do want to get to the chat questions. And so I know, Emily, there's a lot there. Could you pick maybe one or two that we could share with the panelists?
Yeah, the chat has been very busy. But to start us off, someone asked, women have always been in rooms full of men, but men have rarely been in the same experience. How can we change that culture?
So I would say, you know, we're at a moment where, if there was another question that I think kind of relates, it's like when it says we have the right to vote, but how do we get women to vote? We have to begin for all of this stuff to connect the dots on why we need women to get educated, motivated, and activated to become the leaders in this space, to become the leaders in this country. And oftentimes there's just a disconnect. That's government, they do their thing. I'm a civilian, or I'm just a community member. I do my thing and I just live. We got to marry the two and show how, like Attorney General Dana was saying, show people the connectivity. We have to show the connectivity and make a plan that when women run, we will support them, because it's often a very, very, very lonely space. It's a difficult space. So if we want to fill these rooms with more women, we have to support and educate more women. We have to connect the issues that resonate with women to everything that we do. We live in an ecosystem and we treat it like they're silos. We're on a highway going one way. People have turn signals. We're bumping into each other. Women have to support women of all races and all colors. Black women are coming up ready to lead. They can't finance a lot of their campaigns. It's difficult. The money doesn't funnel that way. The resources don't funnel that way. And men will get in the way because they will make decisions based on who they think will be the nice guy in the room, right, Dana? Like that she's not gonna be nice. We don't want to get her, but with that one over there, we have to stick together and support each other. So yes, stand behind women when they run. Stand behind women when they lead. We don't have to agree on everything, but we better agree on 99.9% of the things that we need to do. That opens up the space for us to leverage our power.
Thanks, Lacy. Amy, go
and
ahead.
I want to jump in and I just want to make a general comment about power, and invoke what I think of as a feminist approach to power, that we can share power with others without diminishing our own. And it's easy to take power for granted. There's great power in things like a key to one's own room, a key to one's own safe and stable home, in education, in a support network, in access to health and dental care, in reliable transportation, in one's ability to control one's own money, in freedom from daily violence, being able to read. So there's power in the lessons born of experience, one's own or those shared by others, but one has to think of herself as a person with power and a voice first before she's in a position to exercise them in an informed and effective way. And we have to recognize the impact of gender, also of class, and of course race, and the divisions on people's ability to exercise their voices and votes. And an engaged young person will become an engaged adult, and engaged adults form thriving communities. So what we focus on is helping young people, despite their challenges of homelessness, sexual exploitation, to understand that they have a lot to contribute. We do need them. Several of the teens in AHC's shelter approached staff members yesterday and asked for help getting a permit to organize a peaceful demonstration at Hart Plaza to address Black Lives Matter, LGBTQA rights, Latino heritage. We're going to help them and provide face masks. But it tells me they recognize that their voices matter and they're essential to community's healing. So we say voting is necessary but insufficient. We want to encourage them and teach them the need to organize, to join a movement, to find mentors and partners willing to share their power, and for them to share for the young women to share their power every chance they get.
Thank you, Amy. That's great. Thank you for sharing that too. I think we are running short on time, and that's terrible because we only have like 1 minute left. So I'm afraid, as many questions as are in the chat, I may have to figure out a way to get those to you. Maybe we'll have to have a follow-up session, I'm not sure, but I think we have a lot to say on these issues. So I'm going to ask Carolyn, would you mind just kind of closing up our session for us? Oh, you're on mute. Oh, unmute. Oh, now you're
I
gone.
think I unmuted myself, and then maybe Emily unmuted me. So thanks a lot. I will pledge that we will get all the panelists the questions, and then maybe we can send some of the answers out, and I'm happy to have this party again. So thank you very, very much to the panelists. That was really interesting, and I know we all learned a lot. Of course, we must acknowledge that while women have made tremendous strides in the past century, even the most optimistic observer would acknowledge that we still have a long way to go to ensure equity and voting rights for not only women, but for every member in our country. And that was brought out in a lot today. So where do we go from here? Well, today is the anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. It wasn't ratified until August 18th, and it was officially adopted on August 26, 1920. So we basically have the summer to educate ourselves more as we move through the centennial year of the 19th Amendment. And some people offer the view that the purpose of the 19th Amendment was not to secure for women the right to vote, but to secure the vote so that women could use it to continue the work of social justice. And I like that. It came up a lot today. So I urge us all to read, research, remind ourselves that we stand on the shoulders of those who've broken down barriers for us. We must empower women and people representing marginalized communities. Every one of the panelists talked about it today. We need to think about the ideas presented and how to exercise our voting rights. It's crucial to ensure that we all have an equal voice. We must advocate. We must help lawmakers strengthen Michigan's hate crime law because hate crimes create unique harm. When a person is targeted for a crime because of an actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin, or gender or sexual identity, or gender expression or identity, or disability, it harms everyone. As well as the individual. I know the Attorney General has a lot to say about that. Michigan does have a hate crime law on the books, but Michigan's hate crime law, which is called an ethnic intimidation law, needs updating and strengthening. It currently does not cover crimes where the victim is targeted because of disability or sexual orientation or gender identity, and inclusion of these characteristics is essential. We must work to update Michigan's law. In the material that we'll send out to everyone who is registered for this, we will give you the names of the House bills and the Senate bills that will help advance this. I think this is really, really important, particularly violence targeting transgender individuals is exceptionally troubling in this country. It's quintupled between 2013 and 2018. So we really need to think this one through. I won't even start to talk about crimes against the disability community, community of members with disabilities. That's also rising very, very largely. I know it's a lot. Today, we had tributes going on all around the United States, and we must advocate for people like George Floyd. We must stand up with our friends of color to make sure we affect a change for all people in this country. This is a movement. It can't be a moment. So I will also mention that the next ADL Reading for Good web series, it's a YouTube posting of a children's book for reading aloud. It's a read aloud. It's a video where a children's book is read aloud. It's called Grace for President. I can't think of a more appropriate book as we continue to celebrate the year of the 19th Amendment. And if you're affiliated with the school and you want to get involved in ADL's No Place for Hate Equity initiative, please reach out to the Michigan office. I'd like to thank everyone, all of our panelists, all of the people who put really interesting things in the chat. We will get back to you. Thank you to Attorney General Dana Nessel, Lacy Dawson, Karen Twomey, Amy Good. You have keen insight, women, ladies, and we are proud to stand with you. To those of you who are watching via Zoom, thank you for your interest. And finally, a big thank you to the ADL team, Kristen Jagger, Emily Snyder, and Stephanie Hill, who ensured this program was informative and well run. We wish you health and strength during these tumultuous times. Join us at adl.org. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.